There comes a moment, quiet, unspectacular, almost ordinary, when you feel the stillness in the air and something within you shifts. It's not a thunderclap. It's not an angelic announcement. It's something softer, deeper. It's a whisper that you've been changed, not by the arrival of what you prayed for, but by the becoming of who you are now. You realize that the prayers you once spoke in desperation were never about getting something, but about preparing you for who you would need to become to receive it. And now, strangely, you no longer crave what you once begged for, not because it isn't beautiful, but because something even greater has ripened in the silence. We often think of prayer as a transaction, a kind of cosmic request form handed into the divine, hoping for a signature of approval. We pray for love, healing, stability, answers. And sometimes in our impatience we believe that the delay is denial, that the silence is rejection. But what if the silence is a preparation ground? What if the space between asking and receiving is not a void, but a womb? What if the time it takes isn't time wasted, but time transforming? You don't climb a mountain by snapping your fingers to reach the summit. You climb because the climb makes you capable of standing at the top without collapsing. There is a life that waits for you, not merely the one you envisioned when you cried yourself to sleep, not just the one you dreamt about when life was breaking you open. No, this life is more refined, more expansive, more aligned. It isn't the answer to your old prayers. It is the reward for having grown through them. When you were asking for peace, you were given trials. When you were asking for strength, you were given struggle. When you were asking for love, you were shown loneliness. Not as punishment, but as invitation. The universe, you see, has a peculiar way of teaching. It rarely hands out gifts. It creates space within you to hold them. You've walked through seasons that made no sense at the time. People left, doors slammed, opportunities crumbled, and still you prayed, still you believed, still you held on even when you were sure you couldn't. And now you're here, not because everything changed, but because you did. The heartbreaks didn't define you, they refined you. The losses didn't break you, they shaped you. And now you're not the same person who once begged for a better life. You're the one who can finally live it. There's a kind of joy that only comes after long winters. There's a kind of wisdom that only pain can teach. There's a kind of readiness that can't be rushed. It can only be revealed. And now your readiness has arrived. You've stopped seeking outside for proof and started recognizing that your spirit holds the evidence. You're not looking for signs. You are the sign. You're not waiting for the path. You are the path. The life that awaits you is no longer ahead of you like a distant dream. It is around you, within you, unfolding in ways too perfect to be planned. You prayed for clarity, and now you can see that the confusion had purpose. You prayed for love, and now you realize it had to begin within. You prayed for change, and the old version of you had to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. This life, the one that seemed impossible, unreachable, too good to hope for, is no longer just possible. It's here because the person who stands before it now is finally ready to walk through the door, not as a beggar of blessings, but as one who understands they were always being built to carry what they asked for. The silence you feared was not a void, but an answer in disguise. The waiting wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The detours weren't distractions, they were divine directions. And now, as the dust settles and your heart beats with steadiness, you see it clearly. You were not waiting for life to begin. Life was waiting for you to arrive. And now that you're here, fully present, fully open, fully awake, a life beyond your prayer stands with open arms, not asking you to earn it, but simply to step into it. You were never really waiting for the life you prayed for. That life was waiting for you. It's an uncomfortable truth, especially when you've spent so long feeling like everything good was just out of reach. You thought if you just held on a little longer, cried a little harder, fasted a little more, or pleaded a little louder, then maybe the doors would finally swing open. But nothing came, not because you weren't worthy, not because the universe was cruel, but because the version of you that was doing the asking wasn't yet the one who could hold what was coming. There is a sacred timing to everything. And often it's not the external world that needs rearranging. It's the inner world that needs realignment. Think about it. Would a tree bloom in winter just because it's tired of being bare? Would a child be given the keys to a car just because they're impatient to drive? We laugh at these examples because they're so obvious, and yet when it comes to our own lives, we forget that spiritual growth follows the same rhythm. We forget that just because something is beautiful doesn't mean we're ready to sustain it. And what we can't sustain, we inevitably lose. The delay is not punishment. It is protection. It is wisdom in motion. There were times you asked for love, but didn't love yourself. Times you prayed for peace, but entertained chaos. Times you begged for opportunity, but still doubted your own voice. In those moments, life was not withholding. It was simply waiting for you to rise into the kind of maturity that could carry the weight of the very things you asked for. A fulfilled prayer is not just about the answer. It's about the container that holds it. And when that container, your mind, your heart, your spirit, is still cracked with doubt, fear, insecurity, or bitterness, then the answer, however perfect, will only leak through your hand. There is a kind of becoming that doesn't happen overnight. It happens in layers, in silent struggles. In nights you cry out, wondering if you've been forgotten. It happens when you get up again, even though the world hasn't yet changed. When you forgive without getting closure. When you keep showing up in your life with integrity, even when no one applauds you for it. That kind of growth is invisible to the outside world, but it's everything. And slowly, over time, it reshapes you. It carves depth into your soul. And then one day, without fanfare, something changes. You no longer chase what you once begged for. You no longer need the validation, the applause, or the reassurance. Not because you've stopped dreaming, but because you've become the dream. The life you asked for no longer feels distant because you're standing in its doorway, and not as a stranger trying to prove yourself, but as a resident returning home. This is the mystery of spiritual readiness. It doesn't always come with clarity. Sometimes it's born in confusion. Sometimes it shows up in loss, in letting go of the people, plans, and patterns that once defined you. It shows up when your hands are finally empty, when you've surrendered what you thought your life had to look like, and in that emptiness something new is born. A deeper self, a steadier faith, a greater resilience. What if all along it wasn't about changing your circumstances, but about becoming someone who could walk into them without fear? Someone who doesn't crumble under the weight of their own answered prayers? Someone who doesn't sabotage love because they've healed their wounds? Someone who doesn't reject abundance because they've dealt with their scarcity? This is not just about readiness in the practical sense. It's spiritual alignment, because true readiness means you are no longer moved by the external world, but anchored within your internal one. You see, the truth is the delay was never a denial. It was design. It was mercy. Had life answered your prayer the moment you asked, it might have broken you. Not because it was too much, but because you had not yet become enough. Not in value, you've always been worthy, but in structure, in preparation, in the subtle strength that allows you to not just receive, but retain what you've been given. And that kind of strength can't be rushed. It's forged in the fires of disappointment, in the long hours of stillness, in the tests that come not to destroy you, but to reveal you. And when life finally unfolds, not as you pictured, but better, deeper and richer than anything you imagine, you'll realize it didn't happen by luck or coincidence. It happened because you showed up, over and over, even when it didn't make sense. You became the one who no longer needed the proof to believe. You became the proof, and so the life that once hovered like a distant light is no longer a future promise. It's the present reality, because you are finally the one who can walk into it without shrinking, doubting, or second-guessing your place in it. Most people believe prayer is about asking, a divine plea sent into the unseen, a hope cast like a fragile bottle into an ocean of mystery, waiting for it to be caught, read, and returned with an answer. But what if prayer was never meant to be a transaction? What if it was not about changing the world around you, but about changing you? Not altering the external, but rewiring the internal. Every time you spoke to God, cried in solitude, or whispered your desires in the stillness of night, something deeper was happening. Something beyond language, beyond the request itself. You thought you were asking for something outside of you, but in truth, you were being reshaped within. Prayer does something to the soul that no logic or explanation can fully define. It stirs the ancient part of you that remembers who you really are, the part that's not conditioned by fear, trauma, or timelines, the part that already knows the way home but had forgotten. So when you prayed for strength, life didn't drop it in your lap. Instead, you found yourself in situations that required you to dig deep, to endure, to hold on when everything around you was falling apart. When you asked for peace, it didn't always arrive like a calm breeze. It came through the storm. When you asked for clarity, confusion often came first. And it wasn't because your prayer was ignored. It was because your soul was being recalibrated, slowly molded into alignment with what you truly asked for. This is the secret so many overlook. Prayer is not about getting what you want, but becoming who you are meant to be. It's the spiritual technology of transformation, a quiet force that doesn't bend reality to your desires, but bends you toward a deeper reality, the one you are always meant to walk in. It's as if the moment you ask, life begins rearranging your internal furniture so that when the blessing comes, it finds a room prepared. And if that room is cluttered with fear, filled with old beliefs, doubt, unworthiness, or pride, the answer to your prayer cannot stay. Not because it isn't yours, but because there is nowhere yet for it to rest. Every time you spoke your desires into the atmosphere, you weren't just speaking into nothingness. You were initiating a process, a divine unfolding, not an immediate response, but a gradual transformation. Something was activated. In the unseen, yes, but more importantly, within you. You thought you were sending a signal out, but something was waking up inside. You became more aware. You started noticing patterns. Your perception of yourself and your world began to shift, even if you didn't have the words to explain it. And it wasn't always comfortable. In fact, most of the time it hurt, because transformation often masquerades as loss. You lose friends. You lose dreams that were too small for your destiny. You lose identities that were never yours to begin with, and in the ache of those losses, something beautiful is born. Space. The kind of space needed to host what you've been praying for all along. Not as a guest who might leave, but as a new way of being that settles in and stays. When people say their prayers were answered, they often talk about the external shift, the job, the relationship, the healing, but rarely do they speak of what changed within. The night they finally saw themselves clearly, the moment they let go of bitterness, the quiet realization that they were already whole, because it's in those internal shifts that the real answers reside. Everything else is a reflection. If your prayer was for love, then life likely sent you through a season of loneliness, not to punish you, but to reveal how much of your worth was tied to others. If your prayer was for abundance, maybe you faced lack, not as cruelty, but to strip away the belief that you are defined by what you have. If you prayed for purpose, you probably felt lost for a time. That lostness wasn't the absence of meaning. It was the dissolving of all the false meanings you'd been clinging to. Prayer then is less about petitioning and more about alignment, less about speaking and more about surrendering. Not because your words don't matter, they do, but because it is the posture of your heart, not the performance of your lips, that brings transformation. The universe does not respond to desperation. It responds to resonance, to the quiet confidence of someone who no longer begs for what they want, but walks in the becoming of it. Someone who no longer waits for signs because they've become a sign themselves. And so you prayed. You waited, you wondered, you doubted, but something inside you kept rising. Even when you fell back into fear, you didn't stay there. Even when you wanted to give up, something invisible held you. That something was not weakness. It was faith being built, strength being born. You thought your prayer hadn't been answered, but in truth, you were the one being answered, shaped, softened, sharpened, refined. Eventually, you look around and realize you've changed. The pain didn't take you out, it initiated you. The waiting didn't break you, it matured you. The silence didn't mean you were forgotten. It meant you were becoming. And in that becoming, the things you once reached for now come to you, not because the world shifted, but because you did. You are no longer praying from a place of lack. but from a place of alignment. You are no longer hoping to receive, you are ready to embody. That's what prayer really does. It turns you into a vessel strong enough, deep enough, wide enough to hold the very thing you once thought was too big for you. And when it finally comes, it feels less like a surprise and more like a remembering, as if it was always meant to be yours, not just because you asked, but because you became. There is a strange silence that follows prayer, a kind of holy quiet that settles in once the words have left your lips. You wait, you listen, and then nothing. No sign, no change, no response. Just silence. And in that silence your mind begins to turn on itself, whispering doubts, echoing fears, pulling at the edges of your faith. Maybe it didn't work, maybe you weren't heard, maybe you're not worthy. But this silence is not empty. It is not neglect. It is not abandonment. It is sacred ground where transformation begins, not in the outer world, but deep within the soul. And the pain you feel during this silence is not evidence of divine absence, but evidence of divine work being done in the unseen places of your being. When you prayed for healing, life didn't offer a sudden miracle. It offered a mirror, one that showed you everything inside that had been festering in shadow, the buried anger, the hidden grief, the wounds you swore you had forgotten. You didn't get the relief you begged for. You got the process of becoming whole. And the process, as beautiful as it is in theory, is often brutal in reality. You're torn open, exposed, brought face to face with everything within you that resists love, peace, and surrender. You thought healing would feel like a warm blanket. Instead, it felt like fire. But it's the fire that purifies. It's the pain that reveals what still needs to be released. You asked for direction, you asked for clarity, and suddenly your plans began to fall apart. The things that once made sense no longer do. The people you once leaned on begin to drift. The goals that once lit you up begin to dim. It feels like confusion, like being lost in the woods with no compass, no path, no light. But it's not confusion. It's deconstruction. It's the slow unraveling of everything built on false belief. Life wasn't trying to confuse you. It was trying to unmake the illusions. The certainty you clung to was the very thing keeping you from truth. And so the silence continued, and with it, the ache. There's a specific kind of ache that comes when nothing around you changes, but everything within you is crumbling. You show up in your life, do what you must, and yet inside there is a storm, not of chaos, but of collision. Your old self colliding with the new self trying to emerge. You prayed for transformation, and life answered with pressure. Pressure that tested your patience, pressure that stretched your faith, pressure that demanded you either break or evolve. And you chose, even unconsciously, to evolve. That evolution didn't happen in the spotlight. It didn't come with applause or clarity. It came through the quiet decisions no one saw, through the nights you chose to believe when every part of you wanted to give up, through the tears you cried alone, wondering if any of it was worth it, through the forgiveness you extended without ever receiving an apology, through the boundaries you enforced even when it cost you relationship. These choices, invisible to the world, were building something eternal inside of you, a foundation that could not be shaken, a soul that could not be swayed. So the silence was not punishment. The pain was not cruelty. The delay was not denial. They were all part of a sacred rhythm, a divine pacing. Because real transformation doesn't happen in the sunlight, it happens in the dark. A seed does not bloom above the soil. It breaks open in the earth, hidden from sight, surrounded by dirt. It dies to its old form so that something new can rise, and in the same way, you were not being ignored, you were being planted, and the pain you felt was the cracking open of your old self, making space for the life that was meant to grow. The silence taught you how to listen beyond words. The pain taught you how to trust beyond feelings. The waiting taught you how to believe without proof. And that's the essence of becoming. You no longer pray from desperation, but from intimacy. You no longer wait for signs, but recognize them within. You no longer seek answers outside, because you've discovered that the true answers arise from the stillness within your own spirit. You prayed for a breakthrough and life gave you a breakdown. But it wasn't the kind that leaves you ruined. It was the kind that uncovers the strength you didn't know you had. The kind that humbles you, softens you, and readies you for the very life you were asking for. You are not the same person who once begged for relief. That version of you has been refined by fire. You have scars, yes, but those scars carry wisdom. You've learned how to breathe through the waiting, how to see through the darkness, how to move with the uncertainty. And that is not something that can be given. That is something only pain can teach. Only silence can cultivate. Only delay can nurture. The life you prayed for is not just about the arrival of things. It is about the unveiling of the soul, the awakening of the self, the shedding of what no longer serves, and the embracing of who you've become. And now, as you stand here, not with all the answers, but with a deeper presence, you realize that what once felt like divine silence was a divine invitation. An invitation to go deeper, to trust further, to be shaped by the very things that made you weep. And because you stayed through it, through the ache, through the silence, through the delay, you are no longer waiting for life to respond. You are living from the response that already happened within you. There's a moment that arrives quietly, without fanfare, without dramatic change in your surroundings, when you realize that what you once begged for no longer holds the same grip over your soul. You look back at the person you used to be, the one who prayed with trembling lips and desperate hands, the one who longed for love, stability, or a specific breakthrough, and you feel a kind of gentle detachment, not because you no longer care, but because you've grown. The things you once chased with urgency now feel like echoes from a version of you that no longer exists. It isn't disappointment. It isn't resignation. It's evolution. You no longer desire what you once begged for, because the person who did the begging has evolved into someone who no longer finds fulfillment in those same desires. You thought the dream was the destination, but in the long nights of waiting, of aching, of being stretched and refined, the dream changed. Or rather, you changed so much that the old dream could no longer contain the vastness of who you've become. It's like outgrowing your favorite childhood clothes. You remember loving them, but you wouldn't wear them now. They simply don't fit. There was a time when your prayers were rooted in survival. You prayed for love because you were lonely. You prayed for money because you were afraid. You prayed for success because you were insecure. And it's not wrong to pray from that place. It's human. It's honest. But it's also incomplete. Because as you grow, your soul begins to see the world differently. You no longer ask from lack, but from clarity. You no longer desire from fear, but from alignment. You begin to discern the difference between what you wanted and what you needed. And more importantly, you begin to understand that most of what you needed wasn't something outside of you, but something waiting to be uncovered within. The transformation is subtle. It doesn't always come with a single moment of epiphany. Sometimes it sneaks up on you when you least expect it. You hear someone else pray for what you used to crave, and you realize you no longer feel the ache. You walk past a place that once reminded you of all you longed for, and now you feel peace, not pain. You see someone receive what you once begged for, and instead of envy, you feel content. That's not numbness. That's not apathy. That's healing. That's growth. That's spiritual maturity. Because you didn't just wait for the prayer to be answered. You became the kind of person who no longer needs the answer to feel whole. You stopped defining your value by whether or not something arrived. You stopped measuring your worth by the outcomes you could or couldn't manifest. You began to see that the deeper gift of prayer isn't the thing. It's who you become in the process of longing, surrendering, and trusting. It's the slow, sacred unraveling of everything you thought would save you, and the surprising realization that you were never broken in the first place. This doesn't mean you gave up on your desires. It means your desires matured. They became less about control and more about connection. Less about proving something and more about being something. You no longer seek love to fill a void. You become love and attract it effortlessly. You no longer chase success to validate your existence. You walk in purpose and allow success to follow. You no longer strive for peace as an escape. You carry it with you as a present. The desperation has dissolved, not because you stopped caring, but because you started understanding. You see, most of what we pray for is born from a belief that we are separate from what we seek. But when you finally realize that you are not separate, that the kingdom is within you, that the peace you crave has always been your birthright, something unlocks. Your prayers become less about asking and more about aligning, less about reaching and more about receiving. You no longer feel the need to beg life to be good to you. You start trusting that life already is. It's a quiet revolution of the soul, and it often goes unnoticed. No one congratulates you for no longer craving what once consumed you. No one throws a party because you've learned to live without needing external proof of your worth. But that's the real work. That's the kind of shift that changes everything. Because now, when the blessings come, they don't arrive to fill an emptiness. They arrive as companions to your wholeness. They are no longer lifelines. They are extras. Beautiful, sacred extras that add to an already complete existence. And the truth is, this kind of growth scares people. It shakes the very foundation of a world built on striving and comparison. When you no longer want what everyone else is chasing, when you no longer fear missing out, when you no longer base your joy on what shows up or what stays, you become untouchable, unshakable, free. Because your soul has remembered something the world tries to make you forget. You were never meant to live at the mercy of external outcome. You were meant to live in the power of internal alignment. So yes, you once begged for a life that you thought would rescue you. And maybe that life never arrived in the form you expected, but something far greater did. You became someone who no longer needed rescuing. You became someone who doesn't need to grip tightly because you've learned how to let go. You became someone who doesn't just survive the silence, but finds meaning in it. Someone who doesn't just wait for the light, but becomes it. And now when you pray, it's not from desperation, it's from presence. It's not from lack, it's from wholeness. And the universe, sensing that shift, responds not just with answers, but with alignment. Not just with gifts, but with grace. Because you are no longer the same, you've grown, you've expanded, and now what you once begged for is either no longer needed or on its way to receive without clinging, to hold without fearing, and to live without longing. The moment you realize that the life unfolding before you is not a random collection of events, not a delayed response to past requests, but a mirror of who you've become, that's the moment everything shifts. We tend to look at life as something external to be achieved, something out there that we must work toward or pray hard enough to deserve. But the truth is far more intimate. Life doesn't give you what you want. It reflects what you believe. It meets you where you are, not physically, but spiritually. And now, after all the praying, after all the nights spent wondering when your turn would come, the life you see rising on the horizon is not a reward, it is a reflection. You don't stumble into blessings by accident. You don't trip over healing or blindly walk into wholeness. You become them first. And when that internal shift occurs, the external world starts to reorganize itself around your new identity. You may think the opportunities are new, that the love is new, that the peace is new, but in reality those things were always circling your life, waiting for you to become someone who could recognize them, hold them, and not sabotage them. You weren't waiting for the life was waiting for you. The real you, the deeper you, the version of you who no longer needs to strive to be worthy, because worth has become your foundation. When you lived in lack, life mirrored lack. You looked at everything through the lens of not enough. Not enough time, not enough love, not enough support. And so even when good things came, you couldn't hold them, not because they weren't yours, but because your internal world wasn't calibrated to receive them. When you lived with fear, life seemed uncertain, threatening, unstable. Every step forward felt like a risk, every decision weighed down by doubt. But now, something has changed. You've begun to carry trust. You've begun to breathe with faith, not anxiety. And life, ever so faithfully, reflects that shift. You now find yourself walking into rooms you used to dream about. You speak with confidence that once felt unreachable. You experience peace in moments that would have unraveled you in the past. You show grace where you used to seek revenge. This isn't luck. This isn't coincidence. This is the unfolding of a life that mirrors the transformation of your spirit. You didn't just attract this life, you aligned with it. And alignment is not something that happens with effort alone. It happens with surrender, with letting go of the false self, with releasing the need to prove or control. It happens when you finally become quiet enough to hear the voice within you that has always known the way. And it's not just about getting what you once asked for. It's about realizing you no longer have to ask in desperation, because you've already become the kind of person who draws beauty, grace, and provision without struggle. It's about no longer being surprised when things go well, no longer doubting when you are loved, no longer second-guessing your value. Because now you see that everything around you is flowing from what is within you. Because now you see that everything around you is flowing from what is within you. You've stopped chasing. You've stopped begging. You've started being. And that shift from chasing to embodying is what changes everything. When your life becomes a mirror of your inner being, you stop needing external validation. You stop searching for signs in the sky and start recognizing the signs in your own peace, your own clarity, your own unshakable center. You become grounded, not in arrogance, but in quiet knowing, not in perfection, but in presence. And from that presence, life begins to unfold. Not always easily, not always without challenge, but always with meaning. Because now, even the setbacks feel purposeful. Even the silence feels sacred. I tell you to remain calm and make efforts and commission, because it is the only way in life that will make you efficient, easy, and pleasant. There is a kind of freedom that comes when you stop believing that life owes you something, when you stop believing that you have to earn joy, when you start realizing that you are joy, that your very being is already enough. And in that freedom, things begin to arrive, not to complete you, but to complement you, not to heal you, but to walk with you in your healed state. The relationships that enter now are different. The opportunities that appear now feel lighter. The path you walk now feels less like struggle and more like surrender, because your life is no longer something to fix, it's something to express. You built this life not with force, but with faith, not with panic, but with patience, not with desperation, but with devotion. Every silent night you endured, every moment you chose to believe in your unseen growth, every time you kept going without a guarantee, those were the bricks. And now, what stands before you is not just a new chapter, but a reflection of the quiet courage that no one saw, the internal work that no one praised, the invisible strength that only you and God know about. That is the life you are now living, one that flows from wholeness, not from wound. You don't need to look around and wonder if you're ready. You are. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've become someone who no longer needs perfection to feel peace. You are ready because you've stopped waiting for life to happen to you and started letting it happen through you. You are ready because the life that once felt impossible now feels inevitable. You are no longer the version of yourself that needed proof before believing. You believe now because you've seen who you've become. And because of that, the life you're stepping into is not a gift for the lucky. It is the inevitable result of the one who dared to transform from the inside out.